What if a billion-dollar disaster was stopped in its tracks, not by a team of high-powered lawyers, but by a waitress earning minimum wage? It sounds like the plot of a movie, right? Well, stories like this one are modern-day fables. While you won't find credible news reports about a Clara Vance or a Julian Thorne, these narratives circulate for a reason. They're popular because they tap into a powerful truth, that integrity and courage can pop up in the most unexpected places. And sometimes, the very person you overlook is the only one who can save you. This particular story is about Clara, a woman with her own struggles, and Julian, a real estate titan on the edge of the biggest deal of his life. She noticed a devastating mistake hidden in plain sight, a mistake that would have cost him his entire fortune. Her choice to speak up would change both of their lives forever. So, let's get into how one moment of honesty saved an empire and transformed a life. Section 1, The Waitress. Our story starts not in a glittering boardroom, but in the humble, weary world of Clara Vance. To the patrons of Aurelia, a high-end Manhattan restaurant where one bottle of wine could cost more than her rent, Clara was basically invisible. She was just a blur in a crisp uniform, a pair of hands refilling water, clearing plates, and delivering meals she could never afford. At 28, she moved with an efficiency born from years on her feet, but her eyes, if anyone ever bothered to look, told a story of deferred dreams. Clara wasn't a waitress by choice. Life, as it often does, had other plans. She'd once been a star student at Columbia Law, in the top 5% of her class, with a mind that could dance through complex legal arguments. She loved the forgotten corners of the law, old precedents, obscure statutes, the legal ghosts that still haunted modern contracts. Her favorite professor, a man named Albright, used to say she had a gift for seeing the ghosts on the map, the faint whispers from the past that most lawyers, in their rush, completely miss. But that life felt like a dream. A family crisis, her mother's sudden illness and a mountain of medical debt, forced her to drop out. She traded her law books for order pads and a promising future for the grueling reality of double shifts. Her life became a cycle, the pre-dawn commute from Queens, long hours handling demanding customers, and a bone-deep exhaustion at the end of the night, all while worrying about bills she could barely pay, yet, even in the daily grind, her mind stayed sharp. She refused to let it go soft. She organized the condiment station with an almost architectural precision and could memorize a 12-person order without writing anything down. At night, instead of crashing in front of the TV, she'd pull out her old law textbooks, their pages worn and soft. She'd read about property law not for a grade, but because she loved it. It was her quiet act of defiance, a way of keeping her true self alive. She was a brilliant legal mind trapped in a server's life, a quiet observer in a world that refused to see her. And she was about to step onto a stage she never could have imagined. Section 2, The Billionaire. On the complete other end of the spectrum was Julian Thorne. He was a titan, a name etched in steel and glass across the New York City skyline. A self-made billionaire, he was known for his ruthless vision and an almost supernatural ability to see value where others saw nothing. He wasn't loud or flashy, his power was a quiet, immense gravity that bent rooms to his will. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were said to miss nothing. Or so the legend went. Right now, Julian Thorne was about to cement his legacy. The deal was for the Hudson Spire, a skyscraper that would reshape Manhattan. It wasn't just another building, it was his life's work. The deal was worth billions, and the final piece was about to fall into place, acquiring a key piece of land from a rival corporation. The pressure was insane. Hundreds of millions in financing, penalty clauses, and thousands of jobs were on the line. Thorne had surrounded himself with the best legal team money could buy, a pack of wolves led by his famously aggressive counsel, David Sterling. They'd spent months on due diligence, combing through every document. They were confident, arrogant, and ready for a victory lap. They chose Aurelia for the final pre-signing dinner, a feast before the conquest. They had no idea their entire billion-dollar project was resting on a single, overlooked detail, and that the person who would find it was the woman about to pour their water, that evening, table 12, a private alcove with a view of Central Park, was the center of the universe. It was reserved for Julian Thorne, and Clara was assigned his section. She felt that familiar knot of anxiety that came with serving the city's power players. These were the kind of men who could get you fired for a misplaced fork. Thorne and his team were already deep in discussion when she approached. They were from another planet. Their suits were worth more than her car, their watches more than her annual salary. They spoke a language of leveraged buyouts and liability caps. David Sterling, Thorne's lawyer, was especially dismissive, waving her away when she tried to take his order, his eyes glued to a large, rolled-up document on the table. It was a site plan, an old survey map of the property, spread out on the fine linen like a strange centerpiece. The men were hunched over it, their focus absolute. Thorne, however, was different. While his lawyers argued, he ate slowly, his gaze locked on the map. He wasn't just looking at it, he was trying to will it into existence. Clara moved around them like a ghost. She cleared plates and refilled glasses, her movements silent and practiced. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but in the quiet alcove, you couldn't help but overhear bits and pieces. Words like zoning, foundation, and public plaza floated in the air. For most people, it would be jargon. But for Clara, they were triggers, the language of her abandoned passion. As she reached to clear a plate, an associate spilled a drop of water on the map. Sterling shot him a look that could curdle milk. As Clara leaned over to discreetly dab the water with a cloth, her eyes fell on the map. And her focus snagged on one specific area, the southeastern corner. It was a faint, almost invisible line, drawn in a style of ink she recognized from her studies. It was a ghost. Section 4, the discovery, her heart started to pound. It was a whisper from the past, a type of notation used in 19th-century land surveys. Next to it was a tiny, barely legible note. She could only make out a few words, but they were enough, words she'd read countless times in Professor Albright's class. She straightened up, the plates in her hands suddenly feeling incredibly heavy. She knew, with a sickening certainty, what that faint line meant. It was a historical preservation easement. A century-old right-of-way granted to the city for a public path that was never built but, more importantly, never legally dissolved. Professor Albright's voice echoed in her head, a developer's absolute worst nightmare. A live easement is a time bomb. It can kill a project dead. If that easement was active, the Hudson Spires foundation couldn't be poured as planned. The entire design was compromised. It would mean years of redesigns and repermitting, if it was even possible. The penalty clauses in their deal would trigger, costing Thorne's company hundreds of millions. It wouldn't just be a setback, it would be an apocalypse. She backed away, her mind racing. This was impossible. A legal team of this caliber, with a multi-million-dollar budget for due diligence, couldn't have missed this. It was their one job to find this exact kind of problem. She looked at the men, who were now arguing over a tax clause, pointing at bold print on a modern contract. They were so focused on the obvious lines they were completely blind to the ghost on the map. What should she do? The obvious answer was, nothing. Say nothing. She was a waitress. Interrupting a billion-dollar deal to point out a smudge on a map was a fast track to getting fired and laughed out of the room. The sheer arrogance of it. She turned and walked toward the kitchen, her legs unsteady. But she couldn't. The thought of her mother's bills fought with the voice of her professor. The fear of being fired fought with the knowledge of the devastation about to unfold. This wasn't just about a rich man losing money, it was about thousands of jobs and a legacy turning to dust because of pure arrogance. It was about the truth. The ghost was real, and she was the only one who saw it. In that moment, she made a decision. She turned back. Section 5, the revelation, her heart was hammering against her ribs. She walked back to the table, not as a server, but as the advocate she was trained to be. She stood there, waiting for a pause that never came. Finally, she took a breath. "Mr. Sterling, excuse me," she said, her voice quiet but clear. Sterling looked up, his face a mask of annoyance. "What is it?" "We're busy." Clara glanced at Julian Thorne, who was just watching her with an unreadable expression. She looked back at Sterling. "Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think there might be an issue with the site plan." A dead silence fell over the table. Then, one of the junior lawyers snickered. Sterling's face flushed. "An issue? What could you possibly know about a site plan?" Clara felt her cheeks burn, but she held her ground. She looked directly at Julian Thorne, sensing he was the only one who mattered. "The southeastern corner," she said, her voice steady now. "There appears to be a notation for a 19th-century preservation easement. If it's still active, it would conflict with the foundation plan." Sterling threw his head back and laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "An easement? My team has spent 6 months and $4 million on title searches. I assure you, the title is clean. Now if you'll excuse us." He waved his hand dismissively. "It wouldn't show up on a standard title search," Clara pushed back, her voice gaining strength. "It's a non-negotiable historical easement. It predates modern records. You have to cross-reference it with archival city ledgers from the 1890s. The insult hung in the air. "Are we really going to listen to zoning advice from the wait staff?" Sterling spat, looking to Thorne for backup. But Thorne wasn't looking at Sterling. He was looking at Clara. He was studying her, not with contempt, but with an unnerving, analytical intensity. He saw her worn-out shoes and the slight tremor in her hand, but he also saw the unshakable conviction in her eyes. It was a look he recognized, the look of someone who was absolutely certain. He'd built his empire on moments just like this, on trusting his gut when the experts told him he was wrong. Slowly, deliberately, Julian Thorne slid the map toward him. He looked down at the corner Clara had indicated, then back at her. "Show me," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying absolute command. Section 6, The Aftermath. Clara stepped forward, her hand trembling just a little as she pointed. "There, sir. That line. And the annotation next to it." Thorne leaned in, his eyes tracing the faint marking. He pulled a pair of reading glasses from his jacket and peered closer. The silence was absolute. The other lawyers watched, a mix of disbelief and horror on their faces. David Sterling looked like he was about to be sick. A long minute passed. Then another. Thorne leaned back, his face pale. He looked at Sterling, his stormy eyes now glacial. "Get the head of the archival division at the city clerk's office on the phone. Now." The next hour was a blur of frantic calls and panicked whispers. The celebratory mood was gone, replaced by a thick, suffocating dread. The expert on the phone confirmed it, an easement was granted in 1892. It had never been used, but it had never been extinguished. It was a live bomb, just as Professor Albright would have said, sitting right under their foundation. The deal, as it stood, was dead. Signing it would have been corporate suicide. The structure of this plot twist, where a humble person saves a powerful figure and is handsomely rewarded, is a common feature in these kinds of inspirational, fictional stories. Thorne was quiet through it all. He didn't rage or yell. He just sat there, watching his legacy crumble and then reform. His own multi-million-dollar legal team had almost destroyed him. His savior was a waitress. As his team scrambled to do damage control, Thorne motioned for Clara. "What is your name?" he asked. "Clara Vance, sir." He nodded slowly. "Clara Vance," he repeated. "You saved me tonight. Not just money. You saved my company." He stood up and reached into his wallet. For a horrible second, Clara thought he was going to give her a tip. Instead, he pulled out a business card. "My assistant will call you tomorrow. Please answer the phone." With that, he and his shell-shocked team were gone. Clara stood alone in the empty alcove, her heart still racing, the business card in her hand feeling heavier than anything she had ever held. Section 7, The Reward. The phone call came the next afternoon. Clara was invited not to a restaurant, but to the top floor of Thorn Tower. She walked into an office bigger than her entire apartment, with a godlike view of the city. Julian Thorn was standing by the window. "I looked into you, Clara," he said, turning to face her. "Columbia Law. Top of your class. Dropped out for family reasons." Clara felt exposed. "Yes, sir." "Last night," Thorn continued, "I saw two things. First, a catastrophic failure by a team I pay millions to prevent. They've been fired. Second, I saw a brilliant legal mind, someone with a rare talent for seeing what others miss, working for minimum wage." He walked to his desk. "Your mother's medical debt has been taken care of. A trust is set up for all her future needs. Consider it a finder's fee." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. The weight she had carried for years just lifted. It was a life-changing gift. But he wasn't finished. "That's for last night," he said. "This," he slid a document across the desk, "is for tomorrow. It's a full scholarship to finish your degree at Columbia, all expenses paid. When you graduate, there's a position waiting for you here as a junior analyst. I need people who see the ghosts on the map, Clara. I need you." She just stared at him, speechless. It wasn't just money, it was her life. Her dream, handed back to her, more real and full of promise than she had ever imagined. She had walked into that restaurant a struggling waitress. She was walking out with a future. Conclusion: the story of Clara Vance is a powerful one, even if it is a modern parable. It reminds us that our circumstances don't define our worth. The world may see a waitress, a cashier, or a janitor, but it can't see the intelligence and courage that lies inside. Clara didn't just save a billionaire, she reclaimed her own stolen future. And in the process, she taught a powerful man a lesson more valuable than any deal, that the most important person in the room isn't always the one with the loudest voice. Sometimes, it's the quiet observer who has the courage to speak the truth. In the story, Julian Thorn goes on to build the Hudson Spire, redesigned and better for the experience. He learns to look past the uniform and see the person. It's a great reminder that value isn't measured in dollars, but in character. And a single moment of honesty can send ripples of change that transform not just one life, but many. CTA, what did you find most inspiring about this story? Let me know in the comments below. For more stories that uplift and remind us of the power of the human spirit, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.